Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be reviewing the Milan, a currently Tier 6 9.7 BR fighter jet that exists as a premium vehicle for the French air tech trait. In this video, I'll be going over everything that you need to know about it, including its stats, how it plays, its strengths and weaknesses. I'll give some scores in several key areas, and then I'll give my final recommendation on if I feel that this vehicle is worth purchasing or not. That said, there's a lot to go over regarding the Milan, and go over it I shall. As always, please subscribe for more content like this, as that would make you far cooler than those who do not subscribe. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Now, as always, I'll place its stats here on the left side of the screen. Important stats to note are its speed, rate of climb, turn time, and its all-important BR. That said, let's get into how it plays. Well, this is an interesting plane because the Milan is pretty much the French MiG-21S, except instead of focusing on air, it's more of a strike aircraft. The problem with this, however, is that the Milan is listed as a jet fighter in-game, and not as a strike aircraft. This doesn't really matter all too much, but it does impact daily tasks, as some require you to be in a fighter, while others require you to be in a strike fighter to complete them. The Milan is much more of a strike fighter. This discrepancy aside, the Milan can basically be an early multi-role fighter, and can thus do air-to-air combat, base strikes, and close air support. Whether it does any of this well is up for debate. For air-to-air combat, while the Milan has two respectable 30mm cannons and a very powerful engine, the Milan lacks countermeasures and only has two AIM-9Bs, of which are seen on substantially lower BR aircraft, and also has poor survivability when hit, making this vehicle somewhat of a glass cannon. Now you might be wondering why a 9.7 BR plane only has two AIM-9Bs and no countermeasures. Well, that's because it's mounted on a higher BR airframe, so it somewhat justifies it, at least in the hive mind of Gaijin, though I'll be getting into that a bit later. Continuing through its playstyle in Air RB, when unladen, it is going to be faster than most or all jets in a match, which is nice, but again, you will be lacking any sort of good guided weaponry, and missiles will still catch up to you, making it so that the lack of countermeasures is very painful. If nothing else, it can still equip a full bomb payload and destroy a single enemy base, typically reaching it before any other plane on your team, including F-105Ds, which is nice, especially considering that the Milan has ballistic computers for both bombs and rockets. Once you unburden yourself of your ordnance, you can of course attack enemy planes, and while this is somewhat doable, it feels like the absolutely massive pylons that the Milan uses to hold its bombs and rockets will kill your speed and maneuverability, even after expending your ordnance, making it so that you are much less effective in air-to-air combat. In this regard, if possible, it's almost better to go for a bot or two on your way back to base, and then to J out and switch payloads to a simple missile-only setup. If the Milan had countermeasures and or slightly better missiles, this would not be as necessary, but the Milan is in a weird place in War Thunder. Now for close air support, things are not too much different. You have good anti-ground ordnance between several larger bombs, up to 72 so-so SNEP rockets, and a single AS-30 Nord ATGM. The problem again lies in your lack of countermeasures, forcing you to fly low and out of sight of SPAA. Once you reach your target, you can fling tons of rockets on an enemy, hoping for a kill, but you will likely just critically hit the enemy. Bombs are much the same, although more effective, at least in theory. The Nord is pretty good, but you only get one, and you have to be good at aiming it. It suffers, however, as Nords are less effective versus many of the higher BR tanks that have composite armor and ERA. Either way, the Milan is greatly assisted by its ballistic computers and serves much more competently in the close air support role, although it still has major drawbacks. Now for its strengths and weaknesses, for its strengths, it has very good anti-ground ordnance selections, including an AS-30 Nord, 500 kilogram bombs, 250 kilogram bombs, 400 kilogram bombs, as well as up to 72 SNEP rockets, and of course some AIM-9Bs for air cover as well. For its second strength, as mentioned before, the Milan has ballistic computers for both bombs and rockets. Third, it is extremely fast when only carrying missiles and nothing else at all. For its fourth strength, it has good maneuverability when unladen with much ordnance. Fifth, it has powerful 30mm cannons, though landing a hit will not always be easy, nor will it always guarantee a kill. These cannons are powerful by virtue of being 30mm cannons, not because they're special in any significant way. Beyond this, it has a surprisingly decent energy retention at high speed. For its seventh strength, the Milan has a very good roll rate. For its eighth strength, it has mustache canard wings that you use for like 0.5% of the time. And finally, of course, it has premium RP and SL bonuses, although its SL bonus, at least as of current, is not all too special. And now getting into its weaknesses. First, it has no armor at all, including no bulletproof glass, which is an odd thing considering that this is so heavily oriented around ground attack. Second, the AS-30 Nord, while it used to be better, is still decent, but typically only when facing lesser MBTs or sub 9.0 BR tanks. Further, you only get one, and even worse is that they can be difficult to aim, especially when trying to maneuver because you do not have countermeasures. Speaking of, the third weakness is that the Milan has no countermeasures. Fourth, as mentioned before, it has mediocre missiles in that it only has 2 AIM-9Bs, which is as bad as you can get. The 8.0 BR Seahawk Mark 100 has that many, while the 8.7 BR G91R4 has 4 AIM-9Bs, and for its fifth major weakness, the canards up front do almost nothing at all, as they are almost always retracted, so it's kind of a gimmick when regarding this plane. Now that said, you might be wondering, why are there so few weaknesses when it sounds like there are a ton of weaknesses? The reason being is because the weaknesses that I mentioned are huge weaknesses, whereas the strengths are kind of more like pleasant surprises. That being said, let's get into how I score this plane. For dogfighting, I give the Milan a 3.5 out of 10. While you can certainly earn a kill or 2 per game, the Milan is simply not effective in this role, as it only has 2 AIM-9Bs, of which are essentially obsolete at this BR, and as mentioned many times before, the Milan also lacks countermeasures, which can be an absolute killer at this BR, especially if you're flying in a somewhat larger plane. The cannons can do decently, but they are not a guaranteed kill, even if you hit the enemy a few times. Otherwise, you pretty much have to enter a match with dogfighting in mind, because once you have any sort of ordnance other than missiles, and maybe a Nord, the pylons will kill your maneuverability, even if they are free of their stores. And yes, of course, the Milan does have good maneuverability, but the other things work against this a lot at this BR. Now for close air support, I give the Milan a 6.5 out of 10. The strike role is much more what the Milan was made for, and while it is certainly good in this role, you have to hope that the enemy has no SPAA, as you will die very easily when trying to reach the battlefield. While it has a good amount of ordnance, by simply reaching sufficient altitude to drop it without damaging your plane, you're putting yourself in more danger than other similar planes would if they have countermeasures. Regardless, the Milan is still good for a few kills or assists every time that you actually reach the battlefield, and that is a touch more than most other planes can claim. Overall, I give the Milan a 5 out of 10. This plane, while in theory is excellent due to its great performance and great ground strike capability, is let down by the things that it doesn't have, namely countermeasures, good missiles, and even a proper radar. In all, this plane feels like it would be great if it had a few minor changes, whether its BR or payload would change, but that would likely never happen, and thus the Milan sits in a really awkward place. It's good for close air support, not so much for air RB, although of course it can still do decently in air RB. Now with that said, let's get into my recommendation. As mentioned before, the Milan sits at a weird place. A few years ago, Gaijin had it easy where they could say, okay, this plane has missiles, it's supersonic, and it has countermeasures. Let's make it 10.3 BR, and that was that. Nowadays, because so many planes exist in War Thunder and because of BR compression, you have vehicles like the Milan that have 2 low 8 BR range missiles, no countermeasures, and no radar, but also has a good anti-ground ordnance suite, ballistic computers, and has an excellent engine that can accelerate fairly quickly. Where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us at 9.7 BR apparently. This plane has features that would indicate that it should be at 9.3 BR, and if BR decompression existed, either 9.7 BR would end up being friendlier to this plane, or we could see it drop to 9.3 BR. The problem is that at 9.3 BR, it would wallop a ton of planes, like the MiG-21 PFM and similar planes, while at 9.7 BR, it feels underwhelming and like it's a fish in the barrel. Perhaps the most apt comparison to the Milan is the MiG-21S, of which shares a similar plight, in that it has 10.0 or even 10.3 BR plane performance, but 9.0 or 9.3 BR everything else. The only real difference here is that the Milan is ground attack oriented and has ballistic computers for both bombs and rockets, whereas the MiG-21S has it just for rockets, and is more air attack oriented. In all, while I did my review on the MiG-21S, which I should hopefully remember to link below, I found that it was a fantastic plane and, when used in a down tier, could dominate. The Milan feels fairly similar and almost exactly the same in some instances, except more so versus ground targets and a bit less versus air. So with all that being said, should you buy the Milan? Well, as you may have guessed, it's complicated. Yes, I feel that the Milan can be very capable, but I feel that it needs to be in ground RB to really shine, and even then, it isn't absolutely fantastic. It is simply the best that the French air tech tree currently has at 9.7 BR for premium, whereas the Americans have the A-10A and Israel has the A-4E, to just name a few premium planes from other nations. In short, yes, I feel that this can be a great plane in that it is largely worth the purchase, but I strongly recommend looking at other nations' planes first. If you need a good French strike aircraft and don't fear SPAA, the Milan will definitely do the trick, as it will typically typically also do fine in Air RB. It's just that this plane feels like an amalgamation of high BR components and low BR components, but not in a good way. If the Milan simply had countermeasures or even 2 AIM-9Ds or even 4 AIM-9Bs, I would be much more welcoming to it, but it doesn't have those things. So with that said, I'll be doing something that I've never done before. I do recommend this plane for ground RB players and for those that want something fast and gun oriented in Air RB, but I do not give it my Tankenstein seal of approval. I like this plane, but I feel that there are much better options in nearly every tech tree that you should look at before this plane, namely the F5C, the A5C, the Ariete, the A4E, Harrier GR1, Yak 38, and a few others. This plane is okay, but again, there are better planes out there. Really, I would only look at the Milan if you are intent on getting a close air support plane. But that said, thank you all so much for watching. Of course, please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Also, of course, like I said, all subscriptions are greatly appreciated, as those are what make my channel grow. But either way, again, thank you so much, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.